I read the short version of today's gospel because, well, we heard the long version on the Feast of the Presentation last February, the first Sunday of February. You remember that, right? It's the story of Mary and Joseph bringing the baby Jesus to the temple for the ritual of presentation. There they encounter both Simeon and Anna, who prophesy great things for the child and great pain for his parents. It's a terrific story, and I encourage you to go back to it. It's in the second chapter of Luke. But right now, I want to focus on the fact that today we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Family and the crucial importance of family relationships, family living, household life in this human journey of faith that we are on. Think of it this way: without family relationships, I venture to say most of us would not be right here together today. So we hold up and we look to the Holy Family of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus as a model for navigating the challenging waters of family living. You know, in reality, we don't know a lot about the day-to-day life of this particular family, Mary, Joseph, Jesus. Yet what does come through in the Gospels, in the scriptures, that seems really quite clear is they were a family of faith. They practiced their Jewish faith with regularity. They were connected to their faith community. And it's also clear that Mary and Joseph sought to raise their son as an active and practicing member of the Jewish faith. Back in those days, in those towns, I think that was a given. Faith and religious practice were more or less fully integrated into day-to-day life. And more recently, although not in current times, at least in our setting, but more recently, many of us were raised in somewhat of a similar setting. You know, I grew up in a town where, while not everyone was Catholic, everyone was something. And I think that's true for most of you. And yet today, in our city, in our neighborhoods, that's really no longer true. Think of it this way: if the question 50 years ago was, well, what church do you go to? That question today has been replaced by, you go to church? A sense of incredulity. So I wonder, if Mary and Joseph were seeking to raise Jesus today, imagine the Christ child being born today into our culture, our neighborhood, our city. How would they be a faith-filled family? What would they do to form Jesus in faith? It would certainly be a challenge for them, as it is for parents and grandparents today. But I would hope they would know somehow I hope that they would know two key bits of research about families and faith. Let me go to a slide I want to show you. The first little bit is simply this, a little piece of research that I came across a number of years ago that highlighted 5 ordinary moments in family household life that, when families intentionalize these moments, in other words, when they focus on them and give them some purpose rather than let the moment do a number on them, the 2 things happen. The family functions better, and the family, well, they like each other better. The 5 moments. exits and entries, the leave taking in the morning, the re-entry in the afternoon or the evening, the coming and going, bedtime, car time, meal time, memory making time. What do I mean by memory making time? Is simply the moments that occur in our family lives that cry out to be remembered, to be marked. Some we can anticipate, we know they're coming, a birthday, a holiday, an anniversary, and we mark it, we do things to remember it. But other things just happen in family life, and someone has to say, hey, look what's going on here. We're having a moment. When families intentionalize these 5 moments, they like each other better and they function better. Okay, hold on to that for just a moment. The other little bit of research highlighted 4 key activities that when families engage in these activities, the likelihood that their children will launch into adulthood with a sense of faith and religious practice is much greater than if they don't do these activities. They talk about it. They engage in conversation about their faith, about their beliefs, about their doubts, their wonderments, but they're willing to go there. They're willing to engage a bit, even if it feels like, hey, we don't always go there. They're willing to have caring conversation. And sometimes they take their conversation and they move into prayer, and they engage in prayer together, whether it's around meals or bedtime or other times. And the adage here that was, I think, first coined by Chesterton, but then popularized by Mark Twain, the adage of if it's worth doing poorly, applies. We don't have to be perfect in our prayer. We just have to do it. Another adage that was stolen by a major corporation. Third, ritual and tradition. Families engage in rituals that carry them through the day and through the week, rituals that carry them through the year, and rituals that mark the milestones of their lives. And lastly, families grow in faith when they engage in works of mercy and works of justice for the sake of others. When they set aside their own needs, their own concerns, at least momentarily, and focus on others. So these 2 bits of research are helpful in and of themselves, but what really makes them sing is when you begin to put them together. So when we can connect some of these faith activities to the key moments, then it creates a dynamic that families are liking each other better, they're functioning better, and they're growing in faith at the same time. This is when it becomes attractive and helpful rather than a feeling of a should, and that parents are trying to pull teeth in order to grow in faith as a family. So there is, of course, a lot more to this, but I just thought I'd leave that with you. And I know most of us gathered today are not raising young children, but many of us are grandparents of young children, and we can look for the opportunities to perhaps share some of this in those settings. Let me just conclude. I'll stop sharing here. So as I said, faith and religious practice, they were important to Mary and Joseph. And that importance was passed on to Jesus. Jesus shows his scriptural and theological astuteness throughout the Gospels. Back then, like today, it was no guarantee that faith would be transmitted to the next generation. And there's certainly no guarantee today. As I said, I think it's harder today than it was then. And quite frankly, I believe it's less likely today than it was then. Today's families just don't have the cultural support they once had. But what parent or grandparent among us wouldn't want to increase the odds of launching a young person into the world and having them carry that sense of faith and religious practice with them? That's where the 5 key moments and the 4 key activities can make a difference. As I said, there's a lot more to it, of course, but that's a pretty good starting point.